Okay, division of real numbers. Remember, real numbers just means it can be any number. Fractions, decimals, whole numbers, negatives, anything. Everyone remember what a reciprocal is?
Flip.
Flip it, right. The reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. The reciprocal of -2 is -1/2. So you just got to put it as a fraction and then flip it. If it's a mixed number, 3 1/5, what's the reciprocal of that?
3 and 5.
You have to make it into a mixed or improper first. So you take 3 times 5 is 15 plus 1 is 16/5, and then you flip it, so it'd be 5/16. So, division rule, it's the same when you multiply, or same as multiplying. Two negatives cancel each other out. You guys all know that, I think, right? Just a review for you. But the actual division rule is you take the first number times the reciprocal of the second. So if you're taking 6 divided by 2, we know that's 3, right? Actually, what you're doing is you're taking 6 times the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. Top times top is 6, bottom times bottom is 2, and that makes 3. So remember, we don't have to do that when it's just regular numbers, but when you have fractions, you need to know that. Again, we can use calculators on these, but if you don't have a fraction calculator, you need to know the rules. So you take the first fraction times the reciprocal of the second one. It's kind of like when you subtract. When you subtract, you actually change it to an add. You change the sign, change the sign. When you divide, you change it to a multiply. So what you do is you flip the second one and then multiply them. So it's top times top, bottom times bottom, but to make it easier, you can cross cancel. I could divide both of these by 4. 4 goes into itself once, into there 3. So top times top is -9, bottom times bottom is 5. And in algebra, if you get an improper fraction like that, you can just leave it like that. -9/5. If you want to write it as a mixed number, you can. 5 goes into 9 one time, and then the remainder is 4. So that's why it's -1 and 4/5. If it's mixed numbers, everyone know what you got to do when you multiply and divide fractions? Before you can do it? You got to make them improper. When you add or subtract them, you don't have to, but when it's this, you do have to. So we take 3 times 9 is 27, plus 5 is 32/9, times the reciprocal of this. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 2 is 8/3. So you flip it to 3/8. Again, you can cross cancel. I can divide both those by 3. You get 1 and 3. Divide both these by 8. So top times top, bottom times bottom. 4/3, or you could write it as 1 and 1/3. Here, again, you're dividing, so you take the first number times the reciprocal. If it's not a fraction, you make it a fraction. So the reciprocal is -1/25. Again, we can cross cancel. 5 goes into itself once, into 25 5 times. So top times top is -1, bottom times bottom is 10. So it's -1/10. Now, they're going to start more and more writing divisions as fractions and no longer using the divide sign. So this looks a little confusing, but a fraction is just the top divided by the bottom. So this would be written 1 divided by -5/8. So the rule is the same. You take the top times the reciprocal of the bottom. So that's just 1 times -8/5 is -8/5. If they had two fractions, 2/5 over 1/4. It's a fraction within a fraction. It looks confusing, but all a fraction is a divide problem. You take the top times the reciprocal of the bottom, so you flip it, you get 4 over 1. So top times top is 8, bottom times bottom is 5. And you can just leave it like that, 8/5. Then we have some with variables in it. Some of the problems we do today are kind of so easy they might look hard. Like if you have negative 5x divided by 2/5. You got to use the rules. Your calculator won't do this for you, so you need to know the rules. You take the first number times the reciprocal of the second. So I can just make that a fraction. Nothing cross cancels. So top times top is negative 25x. Bottom times bottom is 2. And you can just leave it like that. When it's written like this, the whole thing is over 7. Even though these are two separate things, they're both over 7. So this could be split up into 56x over 7 minus 14 over 7. You can write it either way, they're both correct. If it's written this way, it's easier to simplify than this way. Because what is 56 over 7 make? 8. So this reduces to 8x. Minus 14 over 7 is 2. So when you have something like this where there's just one thing on the bottom, check to see, first just simplify those two. You get that? And then simplify those two. Now not all the time will they both reduce though. If you had 12x minus 7 over 2. 2 doesn't go into 7. So you would simplify this. What does 12x over 2 make? 6x. And then 7 over 2 doesn't simplify, so you just leave it 7 over 2. Okay? So here's some of the evaluate ones where you got to plug it in. It's done just like the first ones we did. Negative 5/18 divided by a means we take negative 5/18 times the reciprocal of a, 3 over 1. You can cross cancel 3 and 18. Goes in there once and in there 6. So top times top is negative 5. Bottom times bottom is 6. This one, it's 3 divided by whatever this turns out to be. So if I put b in there, it's a negative 2/5. What do you get when you add that bottom?
4/5.
2/5 plus a negative 2/5. 0. They're opposites. So this is 3 over 0. So what answer is that?
0. 3. 0.
Undefined.
No.
Undefined, no solution. You can never have 0 on the bottom. And again, if you tried that on your calculator, anything divided by 0, you'd get an error. So negative 8 divided by b means I take negative 8 times the reciprocal of b, which is negative 5/2. So again, I can just make that a fraction. I can cross cancel. 2 goes into itself once, into there 4 times. So top times top is positive 20 over 1, so it's just 20. Now, this is something that's new to you, finding domains of functions. Anytime it asks you to find the domain, what they're asking is, what can you put in for x? Because the domain is all the x's. If they ask for the range is all your answers, the y's. So, 90% of the functions that we do, you can put any number in there. So all that means is, when they ask for a domain, really what they're asking is there anything I can put in these X's where I wouldn't get an answer? And when there's no answer, it's called what? No solution or undefined. So, do you think, is there anything I could put in for these X's where you would get an error on your calculator or undefined?
2. No,
Negative
plus and
numbers.
minus 2.
Negative 2.
Negative 2?
Yeah.
If I put negative 2 in here, 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. 2 plus negative 2 is 0. Can't ever have 0 on the bottom. It's undefined. So the way they write, the one way you could do it is you can put in, to answer this question, any number except negative 2. Because if I put a negative 2 in there, I get a 0 on the bottom. Okay? The shortcut, so if you, those of you that don't like to write, this is how they would do it in their books. They'd say all reals, using the letter for reals. You guys remember that? It's capital R with 2 lines. Except negative 2. And even shorter yet, if you don't want to write the word except, you can write all reals, comma, x not equal to negative 2. Now, we don't do a lot of this in algebra. In algebra 2, when you take it, they do have a lot more of it. So really, all I'm worried about when we do these find the domain, really all you got to do is put what x cannot equal. You don't need to worry about writing it all out. You understand?
Yeah.
Now, so in this one, what would the domain of this function be?
Anything but negative 5.
Anything but
Positive, I mean.
x cannot equal a 5, because if I put a 5 in there, 5 minus 5 is 0. Okay? So that's all you gotta write. It's just say x is not equal to 5. Now, on these functions, the only time you gotta worry about it is if there's a fraction and one of the letters is in the denominator. Because that's the only way you can get 0 on the bottom. If you had this, is there any number I could plug in for x in this equation and get an error on your calculator?
No.
You can put every single number in it. So you would just say all reals. There's no restrictions. The only time you gotta, it's not gonna be all reals, is if you have this, which is what, we only have 4 of them today, but they're like that. Or if you had one like this. Anything with a square root, and you've got a letter inside. Do you guys remember what kind of numbers if you put in your calculator and you get an error? Square root of,
1.
nope, square root of 1 is 1.
0.
Square root of 0 is 0.
2.
Square root of 2 is 1
Negative
point, huh?
Negative 1.
Negative 1. If you square root of negative 1, you're going to get an error. Square root of negative 2, you're going to get an error. Because you can't have a square root of a negative number. Square root means what times itself equals that. You can't take anything times itself and end up with a negative. So if it's a square root, all that means is x has to be greater than or equal to 0. Which means you can't put any negatives in there. We don't have any of these yet. You will eventually. I just wanted to show it to you. But these are the only 2 types you got to worry about. Now, a little bit trickier. This is easy to see. X cannot equal 5. Because you can just look and see 5 minus 5 is 0. If you had this, what number would make this bottom 0?
2.5.
You're right. X cannot equal 2.5. about this one? What?
Four,
No.
seven.
No? There's a shortcut for this, no one's figured it out yet. How did you get 2.5 here?
Oh, it's fine.
2 times 2.5 is 5? Oh, I forgot, it's not quite right, it's gotta be negative 2.5, would make it 0. Here's how you figure it out. If you don't see it just by looking at it, you know the bottom can't equal 0, right?
Yeah.
So just set the equal bottom to 0, and then figure it out.
Oh,
Subtract 5, 2x equals negative 5, and then divide by 2. So you can leave it negative 5 halves, which is 2.5.
perfect.
Right. Set this equal to 0, add 3, divide by 5, x could not equal 3/5. So, x cannot equal, really all you're undoing this, you're undoing it. Since it's a negative one, what would you do to get it to the other side? And then to get rid of a 7 times x, you, so that's 1/7. So you could kind of do it in your head, you just undo it. I know that would turn to a positive one, and then I know I'd have to divide by 7 to get rid of the times. You know, set it equal to 0, you add 1, 7x equals 1, then you divide by 7 and you get 1/7. Okay? There's only 4, the last 4 problems are like this. The other rest of the assignment is solving and simplifying.